man. Two predators who should have been enemies, diving into freezing hell to drag me back to a world I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. Their warmth pressed against my dying body. Shadow's breath on my neck, Aslan's mane covering my legs like a blanket. Grandpa Tom always said, "Family isn't blood, Claire, it's bond." As consciousness slipped away, I finally understood. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it all began. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months before that frozen lake, I was standing in our kitchen holding two pieces of paper that represented two completely different lives. The first was an acceptance letter from Juilliard, full scholarship, $60,000 a year, 4 years of studying violin performance in New York City, everything I'd dreamed about since I was 10 years old when Grandpa Tom first put a bow in my hand. The second was a medical report with words that blurred together: stage 4 lung cancer, inoperable, 3 to 6 months. I looked up at Grandpa Tom. He sat at our scarred wooden table, the same table where my grandmother had served Sunday dinners, where my parents had told me stories before the accident took them when I was 8. His weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and those blue eyes, still sharp despite everything, watched me with something between pride and sorrow. "Go," he said simply. "Don't you dare stay here and watch an old man die." Our ranch sprawled across 500 acres of Montana wilderness, bordering Yellowstone's northern edge. The Mackenzie family had owned this land for 6 generations. My great-great-great-grandfather had built the original cabin in 1847, and every generation since had added to it, expanded it, loved it. The main house now was a patchwork of different eras: log walls from the 1800s, a stone fireplace from the 1920s, modern plumbing awkwardly fitted into century-old bones. But the land was timeless. Golden fields rolling toward pine forests, mountains rising like sentinels in the distance, elk grazing at dawn, eagles circling at dusk. This was the only home I'd ever known, the only place I'd ever felt I belonged. It was also drowning in debt, $180,000 owed to the bank. Medical bills from Grandpa's treatments, the ones he'd tried before giving up, had consumed our savings. We had 6 months before foreclosure. The letter from the bank sat in a drawer, growing more threatening with each passing week. I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school, and suddenly responsible for a dying grandfather and a dying legacy. Tom reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was rough, calloused from decades of ranch work. "Claire, listen to me. I've lived my life. I've had my adventures. Now it's your turn." But I couldn't leave him. I couldn't abandon the man who'd raised me, who'd taught me how to track deer, how to play violin, how to be strong when the world tried to break you. I set the Juilliard letter down and never picked it up again. The explosion came on a Tuesday morning in late May. I was playing violin for Grandpa Tom Vivaldi's Spring, his favorite, when the windows rattled so violently I thought they'd shatter. The bow screeched across the strings as I jumped. Tom's coffee mug tipped over, spreading dark liquid across the table like blood. "What in God's name?" Tom started, but I was already at the window. A column of black smoke rose from the forest 2 miles north, thick and oily against the clear spring sky. Even from this distance, I could see orange flames licking at the treetops. "Plane crash," Tom said, already reaching for the phone. His hands shook, whether from the cancer or adrenaline. I couldn't tell. I'm calling it in. But I was already moving, grabbing my jacket, shoving my feet into boots. I'm going. Claire, wait for emergency. They're 20 minutes out. Someone might be alive. I didn't wait for his response. I ran. The forest was my second home. I'd explored every trail, climbed every ridge, knew where the elk bedded down and where the wolves denned. My feet found the path automatically, muscle memory guiding me through pine trees and over fallen logs. The smell hit me first. Aviation fuel, arid and chemical, burning rubber, and something worse, something organic. The wreckage was scattered across a quarter-mile of forest. Metal fragments hung from trees like grotesque Christmas ornaments. The fuselage had split open like a gutted fish, spilling cargo across the ground. Crates, some intact, some shattered, and bodies, animal bodies. A zebra, neck twisted at an impossible angle. Monkeys, small and still. A tiger, magnificent even in death. I'd stumbled onto an illegal exotic animal transport, the kind that flew under radar, literally, carrying contraband cargo to private zoos and circuses that didn't ask questions about paperwork. I moved through the wreckage in a daze, checking each crate for survivors. Most were empty or contained only death. Then I heard a small, pitiful mewling sound that pierced straight through my chest. I looked up. Tangled in a parachute caught in the branches, 15 feet above me was a lion cub, maybe 8 weeks old. His fur was an unusual golden-white color, almost cream, and his blue eyes were wide with terror. The parachute cords had wrapped around his body, suspending him like a puppet. "Oh, God," I whispered. "Hold on, baby. Just hold on." I'd been climbing these trees since I was 6. My hands found holds automatically, and I pulled myself up branch by branch. The cub cried louder as I approached, struggling against his bonds. "Shh, shh, it's okay. I've got you." My pocket knife made quick work of the cords. The moment he was free, the cub collapsed into my arms, pressing his face against my chest. He was trembling, exhausted, traumatized, but alive. I heard voices then, emergency responders arriving, and with them, wildlife officers. I knew what would happen if I turned this cub over. He'd go to a zoo at best, sold to the highest bidder at worst. He'd spend his life in a cage, just another attraction. I made a decision in that moment that would change everything. I tucked the cub inside my jacket, zipped it up with only his head poking out, and climbed down. Then I ran, not toward the voices, but away, deeper into the forest, taking the long route home that avoided the main trails. By the time I burst into our barn, my lungs were burning and the cub was making small, distressed sounds. I set him down in an empty stall, piling fresh hay around him. He immediately burrowed into it, seeking warmth and safety. "What am I doing?" I asked the empty air. Harboring an exotic animal was a felony. But looking at his small, terrified face, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. I spent the afternoon gathering supplies, old blankets, a heating pad, milk from our cow that I knew wasn't ideal but was better than nothing. Grandpa Tom appeared in the barn doorway around sunset. He looked at the cub, then at me, then back at the cub. "Claire, don't," I said. "Just don't." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "He'll need proper formula, and he'll need more than you can give him alone. I know. They'll be looking for him." I know that too, Tom sighed, but there was something like approval in his eyes. Your grandmother would have done the same damn thing. He turned to leave, then paused. Better give him a name. Makes it official. I looked at the cub, thinking of my abandoned dreams, my sacrificed future. Aslan, I whispered. His name is Austin. That night, I barely slept, checking on him every hour. And that's when the shadow found us. I was dozing in the barn beside Aslan when I heard the scratching. It was past midnight. The barn was dark except for the heating lamp I'd rigged over Aslan's stall. The cub was finally sleeping peacefully, his belly full of formula I'd managed to get from the feed store with a story about orphaned calves. Every breath he took felt like a small miracle. The scratching came again, not at the door at the wall, low, insistent, accompanied by a soft whine that raised the hair on my arms. I grabbed the pitchfork leaning against the stall and moved toward the sound. Who's there? A louder whine, almost pleading. Then I saw her, blood first, dark patches spreading across gray fur, matting it into clumps. The wolf limped through the gap in the barn siding that I had been meaning to fix for months, dragging her left front leg. She was huge, easily 90 pounds, with the distinctive gray coat and amber eyes of a timber wolf. She should have terrified me. Instead, something in those eyes made me lower the pitchfork. She collapsed just inside the barn, flanks heaving. In the lamplight, I could see the wound, a bullet graze across her shoulder, still seeping blood. Someone had shot her, probably illegally, probably a rancher who'd lost livestock, or a hunter who didn't care about protected species. The wolf's eyes found mine. She didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth. She just looked at me with something that seemed almost like recognition. Then she did something that made my breath catch. She pushed her muzzle toward the medallion, hanging around my neck. The silver wolf medallion that had been passed down through 6 generations of Mackenzies. The one Grandpa Tom insisted I wear always. She sniffed it, then looked up at me again and whimpered. "Oh, God," I whispered. "You're her." 5 years ago, Grandpa Tom had found a pregnant wolf caught in an illegal trap. He'd freed her, brought her to our barn, nursed her back to health. She'd given birth here 3 pups, all healthy. Tom had kept them for 6 months, long enough for the pups to grow strong, for the mother to heal completely. Then he'd released them back into the wild. He'd told me the story 100 times, always with the same wonder in his voice. He'd said the mother wolf had let him touch her, had trusted him completely. He'd said she was the smartest animal he'd ever encountered. This wolf had his scent on her memory. And somehow she'd remembered. Or maybe I looked at the scar on her ear, the distinctive notch. Maybe she was one of the pups. Tom's wolf had come back, and she'd come to me. "Okay," I said softly, setting down the pitchfork. "Okay, I'll help you, but you have to let me." I approached slowly, hands visible, speaking in low, soothing tones. She watched me, but didn't move. When I knelt beside her, she pressed her head against my leg, a gesture of trust so profound it brought tears to my eyes. The bullet had grazed her shoulder, tearing through muscle but missing bone. I cleaned the wound with antiseptic, my hand steady despite my racing heart. She flinched but didn't pull away, didn't bite, just endured. "You're incredibly brave," I told her as I bandaged the wound. or incredibly desperate, maybe both. A small sound made us both turn. Aslan had woken and was watching from his stall, his blue eyes wide. He made a tiny mewling sound, the cry of a cub seeking his mother. The wolf's ears pricked forward. She tilted her head, studying the lion cub with intense curiosity. "Don't even think about it," I warned her. "He's under my protection." But she was already moving, dragging herself toward the stall despite her injury. I started to intercept, but something made me hesitate. There was no aggression in her posture, no predatory intent. She was curious. Yes, but also something else. She reached the stall and sniffed through the slats. Aslan pressed against the barrier, still crying. The wolf made a soft, chuffing sound, and I watched in amazement as Aslan quieted. "No way," I breathed. I opened the stall door. The wolf limped inside and lowered herself carefully to the hay. Aslan immediately crawled toward her, drawn by instinct to her warmth. He pushed his small face against her belly, rooting around, searching. The wolf looked at me, then back at Aslan. Her flanks were swollen with milk. I'd missed it before in the blood and shadows. She'd recently had pups of her own. "Where are your babies?" I asked quietly. She looked away, and somehow I understood. Dead, killed by the same hunters who'd shot her, probably, or by accident, by disease, by the 100 dangers that faced wolf pups in the wild. Aslan found what he was looking for and began to nurse. The wolf tensed for just a moment, then relaxed. She began to groom him with her tongue, gentle, maternal, as if he were her own. I sat back on my heels, stunned. A wolf nursing a lion cub, natural enemies becoming mother and child. It shouldn't have been possible. It defied everything I knew about animal behavior. But as I watched them together, the gray wolf and the golden white cub, I remembered Grandpa Tom's words, "Nature knows more about love than humans ever will." I had saved a lion. The wolf had saved herself. And somehow, impossibly, we'd become something like family. I named her Shadow, because she'd emerged from darkness, and because I knew she'd never leave my side again. The first 3 weeks were the hardest and the most beautiful. I woke every morning at 5 to feed them. Shadow had regained her strength quickly, her wound healing cleaner than I dared hope, but she still needed extra nutrition to support nursing Aslan. I'd worked out a system, raw meat for Shadow, supplemental formula for Aslan, and endless hours of my time making sure they both thrived. Udsky, Grandpa Tom helped when he could, but the cancer was eating him alive from the inside. Some mornings he couldn't get out of bed. Other days he'd appear in the barn doorway, leaning heavily on his cane, just to watch them together. "Damnedest thing I've ever seen," he said one morning, as Aslan tumbled over Shadow's tail. And she patiently let him. "And I've seen a lot in 72 years. "Do you think I'm crazy?" I asked, keeping them. He was quiet for a long moment. "I think you're doing what your heart tells you is right. And I think that's the only way to live a life without regrets." He coughed hard, covering his mouth with a handkerchief that came away spotted with blood. "But Claire, you need to understand what you're risking. This isn't just about love. It's about law. And the law doesn't care about good intentions." I knew he was right. Every day I kept them was another day I could be discovered. arrested, charged with a felony. Wildlife officers were still investigating the plane crash, still looking for the missing white lion cub that exotic animal dealers were offering $50,000 to recover. $50,000, more than enough to save our ranch. The thought haunted me in dark moments. I could turn Aslan in, collect the reward, pay off our debts, give Grandpa Tom peace in his final months. It would be the practical thing, the sensible thing. But every time the thought surfaced, Aslan would look at me with those trusting blue eyes, or Shadow would rest her head on my lap, and I knew I could never do it. Some things mattered more than money, more than security, more than sense. My childhood friend, Ethan Harper, discovered my secret in week 2. I'd been careful, so careful, but I needed help getting large quantities of meat. Our local butcher would have asked too many questions, so I'd been driving 40 miles to the next town. Ethan, home from college for the summer, spotted my truck at the wholesale meat supplier and followed me back. He found me in the barn, watching Shadow teach Aslan how to bat at a stuffed toy I'd made from old socks. The cub was the size of a large dog now, his paws comically oversized, his movements still clumsy, but growing more coordinated every day. Holy shit, Ethan breathed from the doorway. I spun around, heart hammering. Ethan, that's a lion. That's an actual lion. And is that a wolf? You can't tell anyone. I moved between him and the animals, protective. Please, Ethan, you can't. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. We'd known each other since kindergarten, had been best friends before his family's wealth had sent him to private schools and eventually college back east. He was tall now, broader than I remembered, with the confident bearing of someone who'd never had to worry about money. Claire, are you insane? Do you know what kind of trouble? I know. I cut him off. I know exactly what I'm risking. But look at them. Ethan, really look. He did. Aslan had noticed the stranger and was pressing against Shadow, seeking reassurance. Shadow had positioned herself between the cub and Ethan, not aggressive, but alert, protective. She's nursing him, Ethan said slowly. The wolf is nursing the lion. Her name is Shadow. His is Aslan. And yes, that's impossible. I know. We stood in silence, watching them, finally. Ethan said quietly, "My Uncle Mark is a veterinarian, retired, lives off the grid up in the mountains. He doesn't ask questions and he doesn't report things." Relief flooded through me so intensely, I almost cried. "You'd help. I think you're crazy. I think this is going to end badly." He paused. "But I also think Tom would be proud as hell. So yeah, I'll help." Ethan became our lifeline. His Uncle Mark visited under cover of darkness, examined both animals, and declared them healthy, but warned me about what was coming. "That cub is going to be 500 pounds of predator in 3 years," he said. "The wolf will be wild, no matter how much she trusts you. You can't keep doing this informally. Claire, eventually, someone will find out." "I know," I said. It was becoming my standard response to everything. The summer passed in a blur of wonder and work. I took jobs in town, waitressing at the diner, helping with haying season at neighboring ranches, anything that paid cash. Every penny went to feeding Shadow and Aslan or paying down interest on our loans. The bank's foreclosure deadline loomed like a storm cloud, but I pushed it from my mind. I'd figure something out. I had to. Shadow and Aslan grew closer than I'd thought possible. They played together constantly rough, tumbling games that made me hold my breath at first until I realized Shadow was teaching Aslan how to hunt, how to stalk, how to be a predator. She'd pounce on field mice and release them injured for Aslan to chase. She'd wrestle with him, pinning him down, showing him how to use his strength. It was cross-species parenting, and it was extraordinary. But what amazed me most was how they both bonded to me. Shadow had imprinted on my grandfather years ago, and that trust had transferred to me through scent and patience. But Aslan knew me as his mother. When I came home from work, he'd charge across the barn, nearly bowling me over in his enthusiasm. He'd follow me everywhere, crying if I left his sight. At night, both of them slept pressed against me. Shadow on one side, Aslan on the other, their combined warmth making blankets unnecessary. Even as summer turned to fall, I started documenting everything with my phone camera. Not for social media, I wasn't that stupid, but for myself. I needed to remember this, the way Aslan's mane was starting to come in, golden and white like spun sunlight. The way Shadow would howl at dusk and Aslan would try to imitate her, producing a sound halfway between a roar and a cough that made me laugh until I cried. The way they'd both sit quietly while I played violin, as if the music soothed something primal in them. Grandpa Tom died on a Tuesday in late September. I'd known it was coming. He'd been bedridden for a week, refusing food, barely conscious. But knowing didn't make it easier when I found him that morning, still and cold, his face finally peaceful after months of pain. I called the hospice nurse, made the necessary arrangements, went through the motions of grief like a sleepwalker. Shadow knew something was wrong. She stayed close to me all day, pressing against my legs, whining softly. Slim, picking up on her distress, stayed close too. When the funeral home came to take Tom's body, both animals retreated to the barn and wouldn't come out. That night, I found Shadow lying on Grandpa Tom's grave, fresh-turned earth that smelled of loss. She wouldn't move, wouldn't eat. She just lay there, keeping vigil for the man who'd saved her mother, who'd saved her. I sat beside her, one hand on her fur, the other clutching the medallion. "He loved you," I told her. "He loved what you represented. That debt paid across generations. That connection between humans and wild things." She turned her head and licked my hand, and I broke down completely. Aslan found us there an hour later and curled around us both, a circle of warmth in the cold autumn night. The next morning, I found Grandpa Tom's journal. It was hidden in Shadow's collar, a leather journal, weathered and worn, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked into a pouch I'd never noticed before. Tom must have placed it there before he died, knowing Shadow would come to me, knowing I'd find it. My hand shook as I opened it. The entries were dated, going back 5 years. Tom's handwriting, still strong and sure in the early pages, growing shakier as cancer weakened him. He detailed the original rescue of Shadow's mother, the birth of her pups, the 6 months he'd kept them. He wrote about releasing them, about how the mother had looked back at him one final time before disappearing into the forest. Then entries about seeing Shadow return, about recognizing her ear notch, about leaving food for her pack, watching them from a distance, about understanding somehow that she remembered him. The recent entries were harder to read. Claire doesn't know yet, but the cancer is terminal. I've decided not to pursue treatment. I've lived a good life, a full life. But I'm afraid of leaving her alone. She's already lost so much: her parents, her dreams. What will she have left when I'm gone? 2 weeks later, I prayed today for the first time in years. I prayed that Claire would have companions, that she wouldn't be alone. I know it's foolish, but I asked the universe to send her what she needs. The day of the plane crash. A miracle happened today, or perhaps the universe answered my prayer. Claire came home with a lion cub. I should be horrified, should make her turn it in. But I look at her face, the first light in her eyes since she gave up Juilliard, and I can't. This animal needs her. Maybe she needs it too. The day Shadow arrived. Shadow came back, wounded, desperate. But she came back, and she let Claire help her. More than that, she accepted the lion cub. I don't understand it, but I don't need to. Some things are beyond understanding. Some things just are. The final entry was dated 2 days before he died. Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm not sorry. The morphine made the pain bearable, but I couldn't let you watch me waste away to nothing. Forgive me for being a coward. But know this, you are not alone. Shadow came back for a reason. That cub survived for a reason. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in debts and bonds and connections that transcend species and time. The Mackenzies owed the wolves a life. Shadow's ancestors saved ours, and her mother trusted me in her darkest hour. Now Shadow has chosen you. This is the debt being paid. Claire, this is the bond being honored. Don't give up on them. Don't give up on yourself. Family isn't blood, it's bond. And you have family. Even if it doesn't look like what you expected. I love you. I'm proud of you, and I'll be watching somehow from wherever I end up. Be brave, little one. Be brave. I sat in the barn, tears streaming down my face, reading and rereading those final words. Shadow rested her head on my knee, Aslan pressed against my side, his breath warm and steady. Grandpa Tom was gone. Our ranch was 3 months from foreclosure. I had no money, no prospects, and 2 illegal animals that could land me in prison. But I wasn't alone. I wore the medallion. I honored the debt, and I made a promise to the man who'd raised me and to the animals who'd chosen me. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. Victor Hargrove arrived on a gray October morning that smelled like rain and trouble. I was in the barn mucking out stalls when Shadow's warning growl froze me in place. She stood rigid at the barn door, hackles raised, staring toward the driveway. Aslan, now nearly 100 pounds of juvenile lion, moved to stand beside her, mimicking her defensive posture. Through the barn's open door, I saw the black SUV pulling up to the house. Expensive, out of place against our weathered ranch buildings. A man emerged tall, mid-50s, moving with the careful control of someone who'd spent a lifetime managing dangerous things. "Stay here," I told Shadow and Hassan, then reconsidered. "Actually, get in the back stall, now." Shadow understood tone, if not words. She herded Aslan into the furthest stall, the one I kept prepared for emergencies, hidden behind stacked hay bales. I scattered loose hay over their tracks and walked out to meet the stranger, my heart pounding. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to sound casual instead of terrified. He turned, and I saw his face clearly for the first time, hard lines around his mouth, eyes that had seen things they couldn't forget, but also something else, a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Claire Mackenzie, his voice was rough, like gravel in a tumbler. That's me. My name is Victor Hargrove. I'm a wildlife consultant working with authorities on the plane crash that occurred on your property back in May. He pulled out identification, showed it to me professionally. I'm following up on some missing cargo. My mouth went dry. I already talked to the wildlife officers. I didn't see any surviving animals. I'm not talking about just any animal. He watched me carefully, and I had the unsettling feeling he could see right through me. I'm talking about a white lion cub, 8 weeks old at the time of the crash, worth approximately $2 million on the exotic animal market, one of only 13 white lions in existence. 2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd known Aslan was valuable, but this was beyond anything I'd imagined. I haven't seen any lion, I said. And technically it wasn't a lie. I hadn't seen one. I'd been living with one for 5 months. Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Miss Mackenzie, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've tracked animals across 5 continents. I know when someone's lying. He gestured toward the barn. Mind if I look around? Actually, I do mind. You have no warrant, and this is private property. You're right. I don't have a warrant. He stepped closer, and I forced myself not to back away. But I will. That cub is legally owned property. Stolen property. Harboring it is a federal offense. 5 years minimum sentence. From the barn came a sound barely audible, but unmistakably Aslan's distinctive cough roar. Victor's head snapped toward it. What was that? Cow, I said quickly. Sick cow. That's why I'm out here so early. That didn't sound like any cow I've ever heard. Well, she's pretty sick. We stared at each other, a battle of wills playing out in silence. Finally, Victor reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. He held it up for me to see. It showed a woman, beautiful and smiling, holding a young boy. Behind them was a lion fully grown, magnificent, in a circus ring. That's my wife, Sarah, Victor said quietly, and my son, Daniel. He was 5 years old in that picture. 3 days after it was taken, that lion killed my wife, ripped her throat out in front of my son. Daniel didn't speak for 2 years afterward. The pain in his voice was real, raw, despite everything. I felt a stab of sympathy. I'm sorry for your loss, I said carefully. But that doesn't give you the right to. That Leon was raised from a cub, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Hand-fed, treated like family. My wife loved it like a pet. She trusted it completely. And the moment its instinct kicked in, the moment something triggered that wild nature, it killed her. He tucked the photo away, and his expression hardened. You think you can tame wild animals with love, Miss Mackenzie. You think you're special, that you have some magical connection. I thought that too. My wife thought that. She died believing it. I'm sorry about your wife, I said again. But I can't help you. I don't have your lion. Yet. He walked back to his SUV, then paused with his hand on the door. I'm offering a reward. $50,000 for information leading to the cub's recovery. That's a lot of money for a ranch that's 3 months from foreclosure. My stomach clenched. He'd done his homework. Think about it, Victor said. $50,000. You could save your grandfather's legacy. All you have to do is make one phone call. He drove away, leaving me standing in the driveway with my mind palpitating and my hands shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the barn loft while Shadow and Aslan slept below. Safe for now, but for how long Victor knew. Maybe he couldn't prove it yet, but he knew. And he'd be back with a warrant, with wildlife officers, with the full force of the law. $50,000. The number haunted me. It wasn't quite enough to pay off all our debts, but it would buy time, breathing room. I could save the ranch, honor Grandpa Tom's legacy, keep the land that had been in our family for 6 generations. All I had to do was betray Aslan. I climbed down the ladder and sat beside them. Aslan immediately rolled over, exposing his belly, the ultimate gesture of trust. Shadow watched me with those knowing amber eyes, and I swear she understood exactly what I was thinking. I won't, I whispered to them. I won't do it, not for any amount of money. But Victor's words echoed in my head. The moment its instinct kicked in, the moment something triggered that wild nature, it killed her. Was I being naive? Was I risking not just my freedom, but my life? Aslan was still young, still playful and gentle, but he was growing fast, getting stronger every day. His paws were the size of my hands now. His teeth could crush bone. In a year, he'd be big enough to kill me without even meaning to. Shadow had never shown aggression toward me, but she was a wolf, a predator. What if one day something changed? What if Victor was right? I looked at the medallion around my neck, at the inscription Grandpa Tom had made me memorize. The debt is paid. But what debt did I owe? Really? My ancestor had been saved by wolves, and now Shadow had come to me. But Aslan was chance. A plane crash, wrong place, wrong time. There was no cosmic debt there, no generational obligation, just a choice I'd made in a moment of compassion, a choice I could still unmake. The week after Victor's visit was the worst of my life. He didn't return, but his presence haunted everything. I saw his SUV in my nightmares. I jumped at every unexpected sound, certain it was wildlife officers with a warrant, and the financial pressure intensified. The bank sent a final notice, 60 days, until foreclosure proceedings began. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, worked myself to exhaustion, but it was never enough. The math was simple and brutal. I couldn't earn enough money fast enough to save the ranch. Not legally. Ethan found me crying in the barn on a Thursday night, surrounded by foreclosure papers and vet bills. "Talk to me," he said, sitting beside me in the hay. I told him everything. Victor's visit, the reward, the impossible choice between the animals I loved and the land that was my family's legacy. "How much do you need?" Ethan asked when I finished. "More than I'll ever have, Claire." He took my hand, and his voice was gentle. "My family could write you a check right now, cover everything. You'd never have to worry about money again." "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because it's charity. Because I'd never be able to pay it back. Because—" I stopped, not knowing how to explain the stubborn pride that was probably going to cost me everything. Because you're exactly like Tom, Ethan said with a sad smile. Too proud to accept help even when you're drowning. I'm not drowning. I'm just... A howl cut through the night. Shadow's voice, urgent and alarmed. We both ran to the barn's front entrance. Headlights, multiple vehicles, and the unmistakable silhouette of police cars. Oh, God, I breathed. He got his warrant. Sheriff Morrison emerged from the lead car, and my heart sank. He'd known me since I was a child, had gone to school with my father. He looked miserable as he approached. "Claire, I'm sorry. We've got a warrant to search the property for illegal wildlife." Behind him, Victor Hargrove stepped out of another vehicle. Our eyes met, and I saw triumph in his expression. "Shadow, Aslan, run!" I shouted toward the barn. But it was too late. Wildlife officers were already surrounding the building, tranquilizer guns drawn. Shadow bolted from the barn, Aslan on her heels. For a moment, I thought they might make it to the forest, might escape into the darkness. Then I heard the soft pop of a tranquilizer gun. Shadow stumbled, took 3 more steps, then collapsed. Aslan turned back, confused, crying out in distress. Another dart hit him. I ran toward them, screaming, but someone caught me. Ethan, holding me back as I fought and sobbed. I watched them load Shadow and Aslan into separate transport cages, watched Victor supervise with professional detachment, watched my family get taken away. Sheriff Morrison approached with handcuffs. "Claire Mackenzie, you're under arrest for illegal possession of exotic animals and harboring stolen property. You have the right to remain silent." His words faded into white noise. All I could hear was Aslan's confused cries as the transport vehicle drove away, taking him toward a life in chains and performances, toward everything I'd tried to protect him from. I'd failed, I'd lost everything, and the worst part was I'd do it all again. Ethan posted my bail using his family's money. $50,000, ironically, the exact amount Victor had offered as a reward. I spent one night in jail, one night lying on a thin mattress, staring at concrete ceiling, and emerged into cold autumn sunlight, feeling like a ghost. Where did they take them? I asked Ethan the moment we were alone in his truck. Shadow's at the State Wildlife Center, Aslan. He hesitated. "Victor has him. He owns the legal paperwork. There's nothing..." "Drive me there." "Claire, you're legally barred from approaching Victor or his property. Violating that order means prison time. I don't care. Drive me there or I'll walk." He drove. Victor's circus training facility was 2 hours north, a sprawling compound of metal buildings and exercise yards surrounded by high fences. We parked a mile away, and I approached on foot through the forest, Ethan following despite his protests. Through binoculars, I watched the facility for hours. I saw tigers pacing in the small enclosures, bears swaying with the rhythmic neurosis of captive animals. And in an isolated building at the back, I saw Victor emerge carrying a whip and an electric prod. My blood turned to ice. "I have to get him out," I whispered. "How, Claire? Be realistic. There are guards, security cameras, legal documents. You can't just..." "I can't leave him there." My voice broke. "You didn't see what that dart did to him. He was terrified. Ethan, he didn't understand why I wasn't protecting him." We returned to my ranch as twilight fell. The barn felt empty, haunted by absence. I stood in the stall where Shadow and Aslan had slept, breathing in their lingering scent, and tried to figure out the impossible. That night, I researched Victor Hargrove obsessively. I found old news articles about the accident that killed his wife's circus lion named Mara, 8 years old, raised from a cub. The articles mentioned Victor's training methods, traditional circus techniques, dominance-based, using fear as a primary tool. I found videos of his performances, watched lions flinch from his presence, saw the dead look in their eyes. This was what awaited Aslan: years of breaking, of having his spirit crushed until he was just another performing prop. I fell asleep at my laptop and woke to pounding on my door at 3 in the morning. Ethan stood on my porch, phone in hand, face pale. "You need to see this." And he showed me a video, shaky phone footage from inside Victor's facility. Daniel Hargrove, Victor's son, now 18, had filmed it secretly and posted it online 2 hours ago. The footage showed Aslan in a small cage, barely large enough for him to turn around. He'd lost weight, his ribs visible through his thinning coat. The worst part was his eyes empty, defeated. Then Victor entered the frame with the electric prod. What followed made me physically ill. I watched Victor shock Aslan repeatedly, shouting commands, demanding he perform tricks. Aslan cowered, tried to obey, failed. More shocks, more commands. The video ended with Daniel's voice, choked with emotion. "My father has been doing this for a week. This is how he trained Mara. This is how he creates the fear he thinks equals respect. I can't stay silent anymore. Someone has to stop him." The video had already gone viral, 50,000 views, and climbing. Comments poured in, outraged, horrified. Animal rights organizations were mobilizing. News stations were picking up the story. But none of that would help Aslan tonight. "I'm going to get him," I said. "Claire, tonight, now, before Victor realizes what Daniel's done and moves him somewhere we can't find him. This is insane. This is illegal. You'll go to prison. Then I'll go to prison. But I won't leave him there another night." Ethan stared at me for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I'll drive." We planned quickly, desperately. Daniel had included details in his video post. The back entrance was usually unlocked. Guards changed shifts at 4 a.m. Aslan was in the training barn's rear section. It was enough. It had to be enough. We arrived at 3:30, parked in the forest, and approached on foot. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Every shadow looked like a guard, every sound like an alarm. The back entrance was unlocked, just as Daniel had said. We slipped inside, and the smell hit me. Immediately fear, waste, antiseptic, misery. Animals stirred in their cages as we passed, sensing intruders. I found Aslan in the back corner, exactly where the video had shown. He lay on his side in that tiny cage, not sleeping, just staring at nothing with those dead eyes. "Aslan," I whispered. "Baby, it's me." His ear twitched, slowly, as if it took immense effort. He lifted his head. For a moment, he just looked at me, and I wasn't sure he recognized me. Then he made a sound, a small, broken cry that shattered what was left of my heart. The cage had a heavy padlock. I'd brought bolt cutters, but they weren't strong enough. I pulled and twisted until my hands bled, but the lock wouldn't give. "Claire," Ethan's urgent whisper, "someone's coming." Footsteps echoed through the building. I froze, trapped between the cage and discovery. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. Daniel Hargrove. He held up a keyring. I was hoping you'd come. He's my father, and I love him, but he's wrong. He's been wrong for 13 years. Daniel unlocked the cage with shaking hands. What he's doing to this lion, it's what he did to Mara. He created the monster he was afraid of, and then he killed it. And he's going to do it again unless someone stops him. Aslan stumbled out of the cage and collapsed. He was weaker than I'd thought, could barely stand. I knelt beside him, running my hands over his emaciated body, feeling each rib, each wound from the electric prod. "Can you walk, or?" I asked him. "We have to go, baby. Can you walk for me?" He tried. He got his front legs under him, but his back legs wouldn't cooperate. He was too weak, too traumatized. "I'll carry him," Ethan said. But Aslan weighed over 100 pounds. Neither of us could carry him far. Then came a sound that made my soul soar a howl from outside the building, long, urgent, unmistakable. Shadow. How? I started, but Daniel was already moving to the window. "The Wildlife Center had a breach tonight," he said with the smallest smile. "Someone cut the fence. A gray wolf escaped. I heard it on the scanner." Shadow appeared in the doorway like a ghost made real. She'd found us, somehow. Impossibly. She'd escaped and tracked us here. She went straight to Aslan, whining, licking his face, encouraging him, and Aslan responded. For her, he found strength. He stood, swaying, leaning heavily on Shadow for support. "Go," Daniel urged. "My father's quarters are on the other side of the compound, but when that video blows up tomorrow, he'll know I helped you. Go now." We went. Shadow half carried Aslan, and we stumbled through the darkness toward Ethan's truck. Behind us, an alarm began to blare. Someone had discovered us. We ran. We made it to the truck, but Victor was faster than we'd anticipated. Headlights appeared behind us. Before we'd gone 2 miles, his SUV and what looked like police vehicles. The chase was on. "Where do we go?" Ethan shouted, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "North," I said, "toward the mountains, toward the county line." In the back seat, Shadow pressed against Aslan, keeping him warm, keeping him conscious. He was fading fast. The stress and starvation taking their toll. We needed to stop this, needed to get him help. But stopping meant capture. The vehicles behind us were gaining. Ethan pushed the truck harder, taking curves too fast on the mountain road. My phone buzzed constantly, news alerts, messages. Daniel's video had exploded. Millions of views now. #SaveAslan was trending, but none of that mattered if we were caught. There, I pointed to a turnoff, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. The old logging road. It leads to Blackwater Lake. "Claire, that lake is frozen this time of year. The ice might not hold. It's our only chance. They can't follow us in vehicles across the ice. And on the other side is county land, different jurisdiction. Sheriff Morrison can't pursue us there." Ethan took the turn so fast the truck fishtailed behind us. Victor's SUV followed, relentless. The road deteriorated to barely a path, branches scraping the truck's sides. Then the trees opened up, and there was the lake, a sheet of black ice stretching into darkness. Perhaps 200 yards across, we skidded to a stop at the shore. I jumped out, opened the back door. Shadow leaped down immediately. but Aslan could barely move. "Come on, baby," I pleaded, pulling at him just a little further. "Please." He tried. For me, he tried. He slid out of the truck and stood swaying, Shadow supporting him. Victor's SUV burst through the trees, followed by 2 police cars. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Voices shouting commands. We were trapped between them and the frozen lake. "Claire Mackenzie," Victor's voice boomed across the clearing. "There's nowhere left to run." He was right. We were caught. Unless I stepped onto the ice, it groaned under my weight, but held. "Come on," I called to Shadow and his land. "Claire, don't," Ethan shouted. "That ice is barely frozen here. It won't hold all of you. It's holding me. Come on, Shadow." Shadow tested the ice with one paw, then another. She weighed maybe 80 pounds. She could make it. But Aslan was over 100, weak and stumbling. I watched the calculation happen in her intelligent eyes. She made her choice. She moved onto the ice and positioned herself beside Aslan, lending him support. Together, they took their first steps. The ice cracked immediately, a sound like a gunshot that echoed across the lake. But it held. "Claire, stop this!" Victor had emerged from his SUV, and in the headlights' glare, I could see his face clearly. He looked older than when I'd first met him, haggard and desperate. "That animal is legally mine. You're throwing your life away for a beast that will turn on you the moment its instinct kicks in." "He's not a beast," I screamed back. "He's family. That's what Sarah said about Mara." Victor's voice broke. "Right before Mara killed her, behind me, Shadow and Aslan were moving slowly across the ice. I started backing after them, keeping myself between them and Victor. The ice groaned with every step. You want to know what really happened? A new voice. Daniel, emerging from one of the police cars. He walked toward his father, phone held high. "Should I tell them, Dad, or should I show them?" "Daniel, get back in the car. I recorded everything, all those sessions you thought were private." Daniel's voice was shaking but determined. "I've been recording for 3 years, ever since I started remembering, since the nightmare started." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Mara didn't just attack Mom," Daniel shouted. "You were beating her with the whip because she wouldn't stand on the stool. Mom tried to stop you. She ran between you and Mara was so scared, so confused, she lashed out. It was an accident, Dad. An accident you caused." Silence fell across the clearing. Victor stood frozen, and even from 50 feet away I could see something break in his face. "You've been punishing animals for 13 years for something that was your fault," Daniel continued, quieter now. "You broke Mara with fear, and now you're doing the same thing to that lion. When does it stop? Dad, when do you stop creating the monsters you're afraid of?" Victor's hands were shaking. "I didn't. I was just training her. You were torturing her, like you have tortured every animal since. I can't stay silent anymore. I won't." I'd stopped moving, transfixed by this confrontation, but Shadow's urgent bark snapped me back. She and Aslan were halfway across the lake, and the ice was getting worse. Deep cracks were spreading like spider webs beneath them. "I have to go," I called to Daniel. "Thank you for everything." He nodded. Then, to my shock, he turned to Sheriff Morrison. "I'm not pressing charges. As Victor's son, I have the authority to make decisions about circus property. I'm transferring ownership of the lion to Claire Mackenzie, effective immediately. You can't do that, Victor said hoarsely. I'm 18, legally. I can, and I have. Daniel held up his phone. Already filed the paperwork electronically. It's done. The world seemed to tilt. Daniel, run, he said simply, before he changes his mind. I ran. The ice beneath my feet groaned and cracked with every step. Halfway across, I heard Victor shout, "Claire, wait!" But I didn't stop. Shadow and Aslan were almost to the far shore. I could see the tree line. Safety, freedom, just 50 more feet. Then the ice gave way beneath me. One moment I was running, the next I was in water so cold it stopped my breath. The shock was absolute, every nerve screaming, muscles seizing. I went under, and the darkness was complete. I was going to die. The thought came with strange clarity. I was going to die in this frozen lake, and Shadow and Aslan would be alone again. Something grabbed my jacket, pulled. I surfaced, gasping, choking on a lake water. Shadow had me. Her jaws locked on my collar. She was in the water, too, pulling me toward the hole's edge. But I was too heavy, wearing too many layers, and she was already exhausted from her escape and the journey here. We were both going to drown. Then Aslan appeared at the hole's edge. He was so weak he could barely stand. But he reached down with one massive paw, hooked my jacket, and pulled. Shadow pushed from behind. Together, impossibly, they dragged me onto solid ice. We lay there, the three of us, frozen and gasping. I couldn't feel my fingers, couldn't feel my toes. My wet clothes were already stiffening in the frigid air. I was hypothermic, going into shock. Have to keep moving, I managed through chattering teeth. Shadow understood. She stood, wobbly but determined, and grabbed my jacket again. Aslan positioned himself on my other side. Together they began dragging me toward shore. I have fragments of memory after that, the feel of solid ground under my back, Shadow lying on top of me, using her body heat to warm me. Aslan collapsed beside us, his breath hot and steady against my face. The three of us huddled together in the darkness, waiting for dawn, waiting for whatever came next. From across the lake, I heard shouting, saw flashlights, but no one followed. The ice was too dangerous, and we were across the county line now. Technically beyond Sheriff Morrison's jurisdiction, we'd made it. We were free. But as I lay there, my body temperature dropping, consciousness fading, I realized freedom might have come too late. I was dying. The cold was too much, the exposure too severe. Shadow's warm tongue on my face. Aslan's body pressed against mine, sharing what little heat he had left, both of them refusing to let me go, just as I'd refused to let them go. Family isn't blood, I thought. Grandpa Tom's voice echoing in my fading mind. It's bond. And I understood, finally, completely, what he'd meant, what the medallion represented, what Shadow's ancestors had done for mine in 18, what Shadow and Aslan were doing for me now. The debt was being paid. The circle was closing. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, trusting them to keep me safe one more time. I woke in a hospital bed 3 days later. The first thing I saw was Ethan slumped in a chair beside me, dark circles under his eyes. The second thing was a news broadcast on the television, my face on the screen, the headline reading, "Viral video sparks national debate on exotic animal ownership." "You're awake," Ethan said, jerking upright. "Thank God." The doctor said, His voice broke. "Claire, you almost died. Your core temperature was 94 degrees when the paramedics found you." "Shadow," I croaked. "Slan, they're safe. Daniel called Wildlife Services himself, explained everything. They're being held in protective custody pending the court hearing." Court hearing. The words sent ice through my veins that had nothing to do with the lake. "What hearing?" "The state is deciding whether you get to keep them. It's complicated, Claire. Daniel transferred ownership, but you still broke about 15 laws getting there." He managed a weak smile. "But you're kind of a national hero now. The video of you rescuing Aslan has 20 million views. People are calling you the Wolf Girl." Over the next week, I learned exactly how much had changed while I was unconscious. Daniel's videos of Victor's training methods had sparked outrage. Animal rights organizations filed lawsuits. The circus lost sponsors. Victor himself had checked into a psychiatric facility, finally confronting the trauma and guilt he'd carried for 13 years. But more than that, my story had touched something universal. People around the world had watched the footage of Shadow and Aslan pulling me from the frozen lake, had seen what love looked like across species barriers. Donations poured into a legal defense fund I hadn't known existed. Supporters camped outside the courthouse demanding the charges be dropped. The hearing was held 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital. The courtroom was packed. Media, protesters, animal welfare advocates. I sat at the defense table feeling small and overwhelmed, very aware that my entire future hung on what happened in the next few hours. The prosecution laid out my crimes methodically: illegal possession of exotic animals, harboring stolen property, breaking and entering, violating a restraining order. The list went on. Their expert witness, Dr. Rebecca Mills from the Wildlife Center, testified about the dangers of keeping apex predators. "Wild animals are unpredictable," she said firmly. "No amount of love changes biology. Miss Mackenzie has been lucky so far, but luck runs out." Then it was our turn. Ethan's family had hired the best wildlife attorney in the state. She called Daniel Hargrove to the stand first. Daniel told everything about finding his mother's diary years after her death, where Sarah had documented Victor's increasingly harsh training methods, about how Mara had shown signs of fear-based aggression for weeks before the accident, about watching his father repeat the same patterns with Aslan. "That lion had every reason to hate humans," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the cameras. "My father starved him, shocked him, beat him. But when Miss Mackenzie came for him, Aslan didn't attack. He didn't lash out. He trusted her, because she'd shown him love when everyone else showed him pain." Then they played security footage from the Lake Graney, shot from across the water, but clear enough. It showed Shadow and Aslan pulling me from the ice, lying on top of me to share body heat, refusing to leave even as hypothermia set in for all three of us. The courtroom was silent as the footage played. Sarah Chen, the wildlife behaviorist, testified next. She'd studied hours of footage I'd taken over the months, Shadow teaching Aslan to hunt, both of them sleeping peacefully beside me, the three of us walking together through the forest. "This is extraordinary bonding," Dr. Chen said. "The wolf exhibits clear maternal behavior toward both the lion and Miss Mackenzie. The lion shows submission postures, indicating he views Miss Mackenzie as his alpha. The risk assessment here is actually quite low. These animals aren't wild. They're imprinted, but they could become dangerous. The prosecutor pressed. Any animal could become dangerous under the right circumstances. So could any human. Dr. Chen looked directly at the judge. The question isn't whether there's risk. The question is whether the bond and the welfare of these animals outweighs that risk. In my professional opinion, it does. The final witness surprised everyone, Victor Hargrove. He walked to the stand slowly, looking decades older than when I'd first met him. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I came here to testify against Miss Mackenzie, he began. I was going to tell you that she's dangerous, that she doesn't understand wild animals, that she'll end up like my wife. He paused, swallowing hard. But I'd be lying. The truth is, I'm the one who doesn't understand. I've spent 13 years blaming animals for my own failures. My son was right. I created the fear in Mara that led to my wife's death, and I was doing the same thing to that lion. Victor looked at me directly for the first time. What Miss Mackenzie did, risking her life to save an animal I'd tormented, that takes a kind of courage I've never had. And watching that footage of the wolf and lion saving her life, I realized something. Love isn't what killed my wife. Fear was my fear, the fear I beat into Mara until she had no choice but to react. His voice broke. I don't deserve forgiveness, but maybe that lion does. And maybe the person best equipped to give it to him is the one who already has. The judge deliberated for 3 hours. When she returned, the courtroom held its collective breath. Miss Mackenzie, Judge Patricia Walsh began, you broke the law. Multiple laws. That's indisputable. My heart sank. However, she continued, the circumstances are extraordinary. The evidence shows these animals are not a public danger. More than that, they've demonstrated a bond that transcends typical human-animal relationships. She paused. I am prepared to offer a conditional arrangement. She laid out the terms I could keep Shadow and Aslan if I completed wildlife rehabilitation certification, built proper enclosures meeting state standards, maintained liability insurance, and submitted to random inspections. I had 60 days to meet the requirements. Can you do this? Miss Mackenzie, the judge asked. Yes. I said immediately, yes, I can. Then I'm granting conditional custody. But understand one incident, one violation, and these animals will be removed permanently. Do you accept these terms? I do. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. The courtroom erupted, so I barely heard it through my tears. They brought Shadow and Aslan to me that evening at a temporary facility. The moment they saw me, both of them charged forward. Shadow nearly knocked me over, licking my fro frantically. Aslan pressed against me, making that rumbling sound that was somewhere between a purr and a growl. I know, I whispered into his mane. I know. I missed you too. Both of you. We stayed like that for a long time, the three of us tangled together, whole again. Ethan appeared in the doorway. Claire, you should see this. He showed me his phone. The crowdfunding campaign for my legal defense had raised more than needed $120,000. Donors from around the world, moved by our story, wanting to help. It was enough to pay the ranch debt, enough to build proper enclosures, enough to start over. There's more, Ethan said softly. Grandpa Tom owned 200 acres adjacent to your property. He left it to you in his will, but the paperwork was delayed. It just cleared probate. 700 acres total. Enough space for Shadow, Aslan, and whoever else needed sanctuary. I looked at Shadow in this line, at the medallion around my neck, at the future suddenly opening before us. Grandpa, I whispered, you planned this all along, didn't you? Family isn't blood, it's bond. And we had just begun. 1 year later, I stand at the edge of Blackwater Lake watching the sun set over water that nearly took my life. Shadow sits beside me, her pups playing nearby. Aslan rests on my other side, his golden-white mane glowing in the fading light. The Mackenzie Wildlife Sanctuary is thriving now, 700 acres of second chances for animals who had nowhere else to go. We've rescued 3 more wolves, 2 retired circus tigers, and just last week, a baby chimpanzee I named Hope. Daniel works here full-time. Victor visits sometimes, slowly making peace with his past. Ethan proposed last month, and I said yes. But this moment, right here, is what I treasure most. Sometimes the greatest wealth isn't money or success or the dreams we thought we wanted. It's the family we choose, the bonds we forge, the love that transcends every barrier we thought existed. Grandpa Tom was right all along. Family isn't blood, it's bond. And I'm the richest person alive. What bonds in your life matter more than anything else? Have you ever sacrificed something important only to discover you gained something even greater? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how love has transformed your life. Because these stories remind us we're never truly